Element 3, Section 2. In this section, we shall discuss ISO 45001 clauses in detail and how those clauses can be interpreted in terms of actionable requirements by the organizations. The requirements for the organization regarding the OHS management system based on ISO 45001 start from the clause 4. This clause is the context of the organization and it has 4 subclauses. The standard used the word shall in all 4 subclauses, so these 4 are mandatory requirements, which means the organizations must ensure the evidence of conformity is available as documented information. Subclause 4.1 is about understanding the organization and its context. This clause requires that organizations shall determine external and internal issues that are relevant to their purpose and that affect their ability to achieve the intended outcome of their OHS management system. The external issues could be broadly categorized as legal, financial, economic, technological, social, cultural, natural, etc. For example, there could be external issues that may influence the organization's ability to achieve the intended outcomes of the OHS management system, including introduction of new competitors, contractors, subcontractors, suppliers, partners, and providers, new technologies, new laws, and the emergence of new occupations. And new knowledge on products and their effect on health and safety has been known. For example, it was in 1989 when the risk of using asbestos was known, and before that it was being used without taking any occupational health measures. And the key drivers and trends relevant to the industry or sectors having an impact on the organization. For example, health and safety executives' annual reports may show the industry-wise OHS incidents and the identified reasons for those accidents, and the relationships with as well as perceptions and values of its external interested parties, for example, regulatory bodies, and how they are committed to enforcing occupational safety and health requirements at the workplace. And changes in relation to any of the above will definitely change the organization's arrangements or abilities related to OHS. The organizational context also includes the internal issues, for example, the governance structure of the organization, number of employees, competence of employees, OHS culture, top management commitment for OHS, working conditions, working schedules, level of employees' involvement and consultation on OHS matter, level of technology being used, standards being used as OHS management system implementation criteria, etc. So, based on this clause, here is a food for thought. How do you think external competitors can influence an organization's capability to achieve the intended outcome of its OHS management system? Pause this slide and think of the answer before I explain. The OHS management system, like any other management system, is resource extensive process, which means that organizations spend resources on the development, implementation, and ongoing management of the OHS management system. These resources include human resources for duties and responsibilities related to OHS, for example, safety officer, inspection staff, etc., or financial resources for the application of control strategies, for example, purchasing personal protective equipment, or engineering or admin controls. Suppose an organization is performing well in terms of business because they have no competitor so far. The organization is spending some percentage of its profits on OHS management system. But if there is a new business competitor, the organization's profit will reduce. The organization will be inclined to cut the resources being spent on the OHS management system. For example, they will start preferring administrative controls over engineering controls, or they will sack 50% of OHS manpower to cut the cost. Once the resources being spent on the OHS management system will be reduced, the performance of OHS management system will also be reduced. So just by having a business competitor, the organization may have its OHS management system influenced. It should, however, be noted that it's the organization's job to see if a competitor may be an external issue or not. Some organizations may not have any or only limited effects on their OHS management system's intended outcomes due to the performance of or addition of competitors. So it's your job as an auditor to see if the organization has rightly identified the external issues. In case you believe that the organization did not give due worth to some of their external issues, which in your judgment must have or potential to impact the organization's OHS management system, then how will you document such issues? As we have discussed earlier that during the audit you should suppress your opinions and preferences. You can, however, raise an opportunity for improvement or observation, but not NCR. Why not a non-conformity? Because it's the process owner who will decide what is best for them. The non-conformity will only be raised if the organization has no process in place to check and review external and internal issues. But if the process is there and records show the implementation of the process, then non-conformity will not be issued. Clause 4.2 is about understanding the needs and expectation of workers and other interested parties. In this clause, the standard requires the organization to identify the relevant interested parties. We have earlier discussed the term interested parties, which can be subcontractors, regulatory bodies, nearby communities, members of the public, for example, visitors, manufacturers or suppliers, trade unions, employers associations, business associations, medical and other community services, academia, media, owners and shareholders, NGOs, etc. These are all the examples of stakeholders or interested parties. Once the organization has identified the relevant interested parties, they need to identify their requirements in terms of occupational safety and health. Some of the requirements will be legal requirements that must be complied. Some requirements may not be legal requirements and will be voluntary. The organization may choose to adopt voluntary requirements and include them in its OHS management system. For example, the International Agency for Research into Cancer, IARC, has classified night shift work as category 2A, which is a probable carcinogen. This means that there is some evidence that night shift work could affect the risk of cancer, but more research is needed to say for sure. Although there is no legal requirement prohibiting night shift, but some organizations may do this voluntarily. In summary, clause 4.2 requires the interested parties are identified. The requirements of these interested parties are also identified. Their requirements related to OHS identified. Categorize them into legal requirements and other requirements. While legal requirements are mandatory, the organizations must identify the other requirements they wish to adopt. So here is another food for thought. Why an organization need to understand the needs and expectation of interested parties apart from the legal requirements? Pause this slide and think of the answer before I explain. Some requirements are legal or regulatory requirements that are required to comply and are presented by the regulatory bodies. There are certain other requirements that are not legal requirements but mandatory requirements. For example, your major business customer requires that a certain level of occupational safety and health standard should be implemented for the workforce as a condition of their contract with your business. This requirement is not a legal requirement but a business requirement. The business cannot afford to compromise on such requirements, which is why it is important to understand the requirements of interested parties. Similarly, there are many needs and expectations which are neither legal nor business requirements, but meeting those requirements improve the business image as well as OHS performance. For example, oil companies in Iraq are causing cancer within the nearby communities due to the flaring of gas. This is both the need and expectation of the nearby communities that oil companies should invest in the relocation of nearby communities, make arrangements for their treatment, and also provide them with damages cost. Subclause 4.3 is about determining the scope of OHS management system of the organization. The scope of OHS management system is all about defining the applicability and boundaries of an OHS management system. The scope of OHS management system refers to the physical or virtual locations, processes, and products or services. For example, a large food manufacturing company prepares more than 70 products from a single site. The scope of OHS management system could be the whole organization, a specific function of the organization, for example, HR or procurement function, or all processes involved in the manufacturing and delivery of one product. The organizations may include the subcontractors within the scope of OHS management system where they feel that subcontractors' activity may influence the OHS performance of the organization. Thus, an organization has the freedom and flexibility to define the boundaries and applicability of the OHS management system. However, The credibility of an organization's OHS management system will depend on the selected scope. For example, an organization that has excluded the OHS risk extensive processes from the scope and included the low OHS risk processes will neither have improved OHS performance, and their ISO certifications, if issued, will also mention the scope of the certification. If an organization has 10 different sites and they have selected only a single site as the scope of their OHS management system, the organization as a whole should not represent itself in a misleading way, that is, the interested parties are made to believe that the whole organization has an effective OHS management system. When using the ISO 45001 standard as criteria for implementation, the scope of OHS management system must be documented. So here's another food for thought. Why is it mandatory to determine the scope of OHS management system? Any relevant daily life examples you may think of? Pause this slide and think of the answer before I explain. Let's discuss a simple example from daily life and then we shall create an analogy to understand OHS management system scope. Suppose you have a 3-story house with front and back lawns. You call a cleaning service company and ask them that you want to get the cleaning services for your house. The cleaning services company will give you the pricing only after you tell them what to clean, which is the scope of cleaning. If you tell them that there are 5 bedrooms and only 2 bedrooms need to be cleaned, then the price will be less. So the scope is directly related to the price which the cleaning company will charge. Now imagine your house as your business and the cleaning work as OHS management system implementation. So if you include the whole business as the scope of OHS management system, the resources requirements will be high. As you have seen, the increase in scope will increase the cleaning prices. Similarly, there will be high cost of auditing if the scope is wider and the cost will be low if the scope is narrow. Clause 4.4 makes it mandatory to establish, implement, maintain and continually improve an OHS management system. However, it is for the organizations to decide how they plan to fulfill the requirements of ISO 45001. The standard does not specify the level of detail and extent to which the requirements need to be met. However, the level of detail and the extent to which the processes are established should be commensurate with the context in which the organization operates in order to be confident that the intended outcomes of the OHS management system shall be achieved. For example, the ISO standard does not specify the level of OHS competence for any roles, what OHS objectives to be set, how risk assessment should be carried out, and what should be the frequency of risk assessment, OHS inspections, internal audits, and what type of controls should an organization put in place, when should the organization review be carried out, etc. This is because the organizations operate in varied contexts and the requirements of an organization will be different than other organizations. The standard also does not bind the organizations to establish processes exclusively for OHS. Rather, it encourages business processes should embed OHS requirements. For example, it is better to have a competence enhancement procedure which should incorporate OHS training needs rather than having an exclusive OHS competence enhancement procedure. Here is another food for thought. What do you understand by the term maintain an OHS management system? Pause this slide and think of the answer before I explain. The next step after implementation of OHS management system is to maintain it. By maintaining an OHS management system, we mean that the required OHS management system processes, for example, risk assessment, measuring, monitoring, data analysis, and evaluation and review are being taken. Maintaining refers to complying with the requirements for OHS management system on an ongoing basis and to subsequently improve the OHS management system. Some businesses very excitedly establish and implement OHS management system but lose the motivation to maintain it. This happens mostly when there is less top management commitment, so no one takes care of ongoing OHS activities, for example risk assessments, OHS objectives, measuring and monitoring. This results in the waste of resources which were incurred on planning and execution initially. This is no different than any of us getting motivated for daily exercises for a healthy body. But what happens if we do not maintain the routine? We will not achieve our health objectives even if we may have purchased $1,000 worth of exercise equipment. What do you understand by the term extent of documented information? And what is its significance for an OHS management system? Pause this slide and think of the answer before I explain. The extent of documented information refers to the amount and type of documentation required by an organization to demonstrate that it has implemented and maintained an effective OHS management system in accordance with the requirements of ISO 45001. ISO 45001 requires that organizations establish, implement, maintain, and continually improve their OHS management system, and that they document their system in a way that is appropriate to the nature and size of the organization and to the specific OHS risks and opportunities that the organization faces. The extent of documented information needed to meet the requirements of ISO 45001 will vary depending on factors such as the size and complexity of the organization, the nature of its activities, and the level of OHS risks involved. However, the standard requires that the organization document at least certain key elements such as its OHS policy, objectives, and procedures. Let me clarify with an example. Consider two organizations, a small retail store and a large construction company. The small retail store may have a simpler OHS management system with fewer documented procedures and policies, as the hazards and risks in a retail store are generally lower compared to a construction site. In contrast, the construction company may have more extensive OHS management system with detailed documented procedures and policies due to the higher level of risks involved in construction activities. Similarly, the extent of documented information may differ between two organizations in the same industry depending on their specific operations and processes. For instance, two manufacturing companies producing the same type of product may have different OHS management systems due to variation of their production processes, machinery, and equipment, which may pose different types and levels of hazards. Furthermore, legal and regulatory requirements also play a crucial role in determining the extent of documented information required for an OHS management system. For example, organizations operating in highly regulated industries such as healthcare or pharmaceuticals may need to comply with extensive documentation requirements to ensure the safety of workers and the public. In summary, the extent of documented information required for an OHS management system may differ for two different organizations depending on their size, complexity, industry, hazards and risks involved, and legal and regulatory requirements. Identify what type of documented information an organization needs to maintain as per ISO 45001 requirements. Also, identify what type of documented information an organization needs to retain as per ISO 45001 requirements. Pause this slide and make your search through Google or any other source and think of the answer. Write down your answer before I explain. Following are the mandatory documents required to be maintained by the organizations as documented information. And following are the mandatory record keepings that is required to be retained by the organizations as documented information.